Well, hello there. Welcome to Chapter 27, the last chapter of our unit of Forging and Industrial Society. Chapter 27, the American Pageant for AP U.S. History or regular U.S. History, covers empire and expansion from 1900 to 1909. So we'll be looking at that here. Let's get into it. We got a lot to do in this first section here. We have a political cartoon here, 10,000 miles from tip to tip. This is in 1898, basically stretching from the Philippines all the way to the east coast of the United States, including Puerto Rico and the Caribbean there. The United States had an empire that was 10,000 miles. How did we get that? Usually you think empire, you think, the Romans or Darth Vader, join me on the dark side. How did America get there? Did Vader tempt us? What was going on? Did Caesar take over? Let's get into it. So America turns outward. Our foreign policy changed in the late 1800s. For 100 years, there was a tradition that America would stay out of other countries' business. George Washington, in his farewell address, which was a speech largely written by Alexander Hamilton, but also helped, Washington did his part too, was published in newspapers. It wasn't actually a speech. Warned against getting involved with Europe. Basically, that Europe's always fighting. Just stay away from them. Use your two oceans to protect yourself and grow as a nation. The United States, our country, followed that for about 100 years. We were isolationists, but we still traded. We were cool with selling stuff all over the world. I always like to think that we were like a computer nerd or a gamer that was in the basement, just playing games all the time. Going old school, we're playing World of Warcraft, and we're just obsessed with that. But we have another computer, and we sell stuff on eBay because we like to make money. We also, in the corner, we have a Bowflex. That's a workout machine, and we're in there getting pumped. And so for 100 years, America is just getting bigger and ripped and stronger, and that's our industrial revolution. And so 100 years after we go into the basement and just do our own thing and try to conquer our video game, aka the continental United States, and we're trading stuff online, and we're getting pumped on our Bowflex, we're ready to come out to the world and show off these sweet guns. Not sure those are guns at all. And so expansionism, there's two factors here. In 1890, the frontiers closed. The census determined that the continental United States was filled up. There's people everywhere, and so what do we do now? Imagine if you've been playing a video game forever and then you beat it. What do? You start over? I mean, some people do, but you can't start over to break frontier land in America. I know you can't really beat WoW, but just imagine you could. So we're trying to look elsewhere for trade, for influence. What can we take over now? Where can we spread our great American ways in that perspective? You have this guy named Josiah Strong. He's a reverend who wrote this book called Our Country. Really, really awful book. It's like each chapter is like what's wrong with America, and there's a chapter on Catholics and Jews and Mormons, and it's awful. It's very racist. It reads like a white supremacist book. And then after that, it talks about after those problems are fixed, what's America going to do now? They're going to take over Mexico, and then Central America, and then South America, and they're going to move westward. They're going to take over the Pacific Islands, and they're going to take Japan, and then they're going to take China, and they're going to take over the world, and they pull a Howard Dean and go, Yah! Yeah, you might not get that reference, but oh well. So he thought that we should lift up the uncivilized people of the world, that we were on a mission from God. To quote the Blues Brothers, we're on a mission from God. That's America's job, is to lift up the underprivileged, to help them be like little Americans, because that is our destiny. There's a word for that, a phrase, manifest destiny. There we go. And so America was supposed to spread its goodness, its awesomeness to the world. It was a mission from God. God had ordained it. And there's so many instances in American history where Americans pointed to like, hey, God likes us. He favors us. For instance, the British burned Washington, D.C. in 1814, set fire as a part of the War of 1812 to the Capitol and the White House. And then a hurricane and tornado hit simultaneously and put out the fires and scattered the troops. That's bizarre. The ink's not even dry on the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848, and gold is discovered, the biggest gold strike in American history to that point. So to many Americans, that was evidence that God favored these people, that the Americans should spread their wonderful ways. And we got nothing else to do because the frontier is closed. And this is the age of empires. Everybody else is doing it. Europe, Britain, France, Germany starting to do this. They are expanding. They're conquering the globe, and they're doing it for many reasons, for raw materials, for markets for their goods, and for prestige worldwide. No, worldwide prestige. Or was it prestige worldwide? That's Step Brothers. Worldwide prestige. At this time, the biggest and most famous empire was the British Empire, and the sun never set upon the British Empire. Whatever, British people. Hoity-toity and all that good stuff. This is a really funny clip. Let's watch this, actually. From Eddie Izzard. It's on YouTube.
We stole countries. That's how you build an empire.
This is the mentality.
We stole countries with the cunning use of flags. Yeah. You just sail around the world and stick a flag in. I claim India for Britain. And they go, you can't claim us, we live here. 500 million of us. Do you have a flag?
There you go. You get the gist of it. There's a bad word I want to cut out. This is a fun map here. It shows every country in pink that the British invaded. All but 22 countries. Quit slacking, Britain. You got more to go. Mongolia is just waiting. Come on. There's only 4 million Mongolians. Go invade Sweden, Bolivia, Guatemala. What? Come on, Britain. Fill in the globe. Conquer it. Or not. I'm just kidding. This is a political cartoon of the day. The British and their empire. And they have Ireland. And they have Borsland. They have Australia. They have Gibraltar. They have Egypt, Jamaica, Canada, India, Egypt, Hong Kong, Malta. You name it. They got it. Except us. We broke away. So America just emulates, the older brothers here. Captain Alfred Thayer Mahan wrote a book in 1890. It influenced the whole world. They called The Influence of Sea Power Upon History. Basically, that the navies were the most vital piece of, dominating the globe. The British had the biggest empire in the world, and it wasn't a coincidence. They had the greatest navy at that time in the globe. And so to modernize the navy was a way to protect and expand the United States' holdings. If there's trouble abroad, if one part of the empire is not behaving, the navy can get there and bring troops and supplies and put down a rebellion. And so control of the seas was key to world domination. And so under Mahan's direction, the navy was modernized. They switched from wood ships to steel, and they switched from sails to steam, which is always just mind blowing. You think you take a piece of metal, or if you're British, metal, and you can make it float. Because of science. Science, boy. Because of buoyancy or something like that. That's a bad joke. I'm just going to move on. I am a father. Those are dad jokes. I'm sorry. The Secretary of State, James Blaine, published his Big Sister policy, tried to get Latin American countries to open up their markets to Americans, trying to get them to, hey, sell us stuff. We won't take over you. We're not going to dominate you like those British and French, but we want to sell stuff to you, and you need to sell stuff to us. Let's go. Americans were prepared to go to war. Any small disputes over with other countries, we have the Monroe Doctrine, basically West Side homies for life. This is our turf. You stay out of it, Europe. And this demonstrated the country's new aggressive mood. We're not going to take it. We're better than you, Britain. We're better than you, France. God ordained us to dominate the globe. And so we're going to do that, but not to get rich like you guys, to be greedy and have power. We're helping people. That's what America does. That's their perspective. So there's an area of British Guyana between and Venezuela was disputed for 50 years. Gold was discovered, not a good thing for letting them do their own thing. Gold's discovered, and Secretary of State Richard Olney warned that if Britain went to war with Venezuela, it would violate the Monroe Doctrine. President Cleveland actually threatened war over this. Britain had problems in Europe, so they reconciled with America, and it's really kind of the last time that America and Britain don't really get along or see eye to eye. At this point, after this, the Americans and the British form a pretty strong friendship, a bond that lasts until this day. This is called the Great Rapprochement, and it's the cornerstone of our both nations' foreign policies to this day. We're buddies, and we're Batman, they're Robin. I don't know. They're kind of our ally. They're kind of sidekick. They would hate that. Sorry if you're in Britain watching this. This is the imperial menu of William McKinley, and what should we have? Should we have some Cuba steak, some Puerto Rico pig, or Philippine floating islands, or the Sandwich Islands? Well, I hardly know what to take first. A very different idea. This seems very un-American. So, let's talk about Hawaii. In 1867, after purchasing Alaska from the Russians, William Seward acquired Midway Island as a way we needed ports. The United States needed places to dock their ships to resupply, to refuel, in order to trade with Asia. The Hawaiian Islands were closer. They're a lot nicer. And so this was something that the United States had kept their eye on. They would love to acquire the Hawaiian Islands, who were an independent nation at that time. The first Americans showed up in the 1790s. They began trading there. The first king to unite the major islands under one kingdom was the guy in the statue here, King Kamehameha I. Did so by murdering his cousin and uniting the kingdoms. Hawaii, a little fun fact, is the only place in the United States that has royal palaces. In the picture there are the royal palaces of Hawaii, the former monarchs of the Hawaiian kingdom. Americans, though, brought diseases and killed off many of the natives. Naturally, this is kind of a reoccurring theme with Native Americans or Native people in the United States and Americans or whites showing up and spreading their noxious diseases. Here are the major Hawaiian Islands. You have the Niihau, Kauai, Oahu, Molokai, Lanai, Maui, Kaulauea, and then the big islander, Hawaii. Hawaiian's a fun language. The Christian missionaries that showed up there, they helped alphabetize it. There's only 12 letters in the Hawaiian alphabet, and you're supposed to pronounce every single letter. So go learn some Hawaiian. Like Merry Christmas, Malikalikimaka. Missionaries showed up and sugarcane growers. In the 1820s, the Christians showed up and they Christianized the native Hawaiians. Planters brought sugarcane. The climate was good for growing sugar. However, there weren't enough workers there because it's a labor-intensive crop. And so they had to bring in workers from Japan, from China, from the Pacific. And so if you go to Hawaii today, there's a very strong Asian flair. Many signs and businesses are actually, their signs are in Japanese and other languages, Filipino in fact, because there are so many different Asian populations in Hawaii. The United States recognized Hawaiian independence in 1842. And in 1887, we signed an agreement to establish the naval base at Pearl Harbor, which is still the #1 most important base in the Pacific Ocean for the United States to this day. We know it's notorious. We'll get to that later in this class with World War II. The American planters revolted. In 1891, the Queen, Liliuokalani, repeat after me, Liliuokalani, you're speaking Hawaiian now, wanted economic control back from the American planters. And so the planters overthrew her and set up a provisional government and elected the guy with the sweet beard here that looks like, I don't know, the letter M almost, as their president. His name is Sanford Dole. You maybe heard of him. Dole pineapple, Dole fruits. No tariffs on sugar if they were part of the United States. So being an independent country, they were paying taxes to sell their sugar to the U.S. And so the planters want to join the U.S. and eliminate that tax and help, make some more profit. The McKinley Tariff of 1890 was really crippling their profits. So annexation, Presidents Harrison and Cleveland didn't support it. Hawaiians didn't like this either. Queen Liliuokalani wanted her kingdom back. She was disposed. She was living in exile in Great Britain at the time. Congress, under the imperialist William McKinley, approved the annexation of Hawaii in 1898. And we can, so Hawaii eventually becomes a state in 1959. About a couple 3,000 miles south of Hawaii are the islands of Samoa. And this is just just a way to kind of show you the mentality of the imperialists at the time. In 1899, the U.S., Great Britain, and Germany divided up the islands. They almost went to war over it in 1889. Basically, you take some of these, you take some of those, Germany, you get these. And they signed a treaty dividing up the Samoan Islands. Nobody consented with the Samoans. They just did it. So it's kind of a strange thing. Poor Samoans. Still part of the United States. American Samoa is a territory. They use a dollar. You can go there without a passport. They actually have national parks. This is a painting of Queen Liliuokalani. She lived from 1838 to 1917. She actually wrote a lot of songs too, including the famous Aloha, very famous Hawaiian song. Died in exile. All right, let's talk about Cuba. Cubans, one of the last, actually the last, well, besides Puerto Rico, one of the last colonies of the Spanish. The Spanish, who once dominated almost all the New World, all they had left was a few islands in the Caribbean in 1895. And so Cubans revolted against Spanish rule. These insurrectos, I can't roll my R's, I'm sorry, turned to guerrilla tactics to gain their independence. And so Jose Marti, who was living in New York City at the time, led this revolt in 1895. When he learned of the revolt, he returned to Cuba to lead his people to freedom. The Spanish put the Cubans in reconstruction camps so they could not support the insurrectos. They didn't target the insurrectos. Instead, they just put the people in there, and the conditions were so poor that many Cubans were starving. They're destitute. They're very awful conditions. Thousands were dying of this. And so Americans are getting reports of this that's going on, and many Americans sympathize with Cuba, of a nation trying to fight for its independence, just like we did against the Great British. And so many Americans wanted to help Cuba. Other Americans wanted to help Cuba so they could take it. And so America had $50 million invested in Cuba, too. There's a financial reason why Cuba could be helped out here. Congress passed a resolution in 1896 to recognize the revolting Cubans as their government. Cleveland opposed imperialism and would not fight for Cuba. But American citizens had a lot of sympathy for the Cubans. When McKinley takes over, he wants to settle it peacefully, but he's more of an imperialistic person. Newspapers were fueling the fire, though, and so they published many of the tragedies. Some of these are made up. This is a yellow journalistic picture here. Spaniards search women of American steamers. This woman has been disrobed, and they're violating her sanctity and all this stuff, and so this was totally made up. But yellow journalism by Pulitzer and Hearst pushed the United States to war. Supposedly, William Randolph Hearst said that you supply the pictures and I'll supply the war, and that's how powerful their newspapers were. So in January 1898, McKinley sent the USS Maine to protect Americans in Cuba, fearing for their safety because of the Spanish. While in Havana Harbor on February 15, 1898, it exploded. Immediately, the newspapers, using their sensationalized story, blamed the Spanish that the USS Maine was bombed. They remember that basically the blood of Americans had been spilled, and you need to remember the USS Maine. It killed 260 servicemen, very tragic situation. The newspapers, like I said, immediately blamed the Spanish. Later evidence after this whole war, they drug up the boat and found out it was an accident, like a boiler exploded or something, and it was just an unfortunate incident. McKinley sends a message to the Spanish, basically calling for a truce, meeting the demands, closing their camps. It was impossible for them to meet. They wanted to close the camps and make armistice with the rebels. It didn't happen, and so the United States declared war on Spain in April 25th, 1898. This is the third time in American history. At that time, the U.S. had actually declared war. They declared war on Britain in 1812, on Mexico in 1846, and now Spain in 1898. They adopted the Teller Amendment, though, as a part of the declaration of war, which if the United States wins, Cuba will be free. The U.S. will not take over Cuba as a colony, which upset some imperialists. But, to sell this war to the American people, they had to make sure that, they're not doing this just to take over land. We're not like Britain and France or Germany or Denmark or whoever. Denmark is a bad example, sorry. Belgium. This is a painting that was published in many, many newspapers, and it is horrific to see the bodies of Americans flying and the blood in the water. This tragedy of the USS Maine exploding. So you have war with Spain between the United States and Spain over the issue of Cuba. So naturally, the first battle would be in the Philippines, on the other side of the world. Okay. At the time, the Spanish military significantly outnumbered the American army, but the naval ships were much better to condition the Spanish. And on May 1st, 1898, just less than a week after the Declaration of Independence, Commodore George Dewey's six-ship fleet attacked Spain's fleet in the Philippines. Spain was in control of the Philippines at that time. They destroyed the 10-ship Spanish fleet at Manila Bay. On August 13th, 1898, American troops captured the capital of Manila. They allied with the exiled rebel Emilio Aguinaldo, and they successfully drove the Spanish out. Congress at this time also annexed Hawaii in July 7th, 1898, to give Dewey a base for his supplies. Kind of weird, though. Spanish-American War, Cuba, let's fight in the Philippines. Yay. Here's kind of the surprise attack on May 1st, 1898. Manila fell to the American and Filipino forces on August 13th, 1898. Here's a painting of the attack in Manila Bay. You may fire when ready, Gridley, is what Dewey commanded his officers on their surprise attack. Here's Aguinaldo in 1900, with his forces. Eventually he rebels against the United States, and we're going to learn about why. So, back in the Caribbean, the fighting in Cuba. The Navy blockaded the Spanish in Santiago. 17,000 troops land in the Caribbean in the summer wearing wool. Wow, not a good decision there. 1/4 of those troops were the African Americans. Many were the Buffalo Soldiers that we mentioned in previous chapters. They were poorly equipped. They had little experience. They really didn't know much about fighting. And so it doesn't go well to start. Like I said, arriving wearing wool in the Caribbean in the middle of the summer, not a good idea. General William Shafter is the commander of all the men here in Cuba and Puerto Rico. And so things were not going well until the Rough Riders did their part. Theodore Roosevelt, the Assistant Secretary of Navy, resigned his position as soon as the war broke out and started this special cavalry of all his buddies, his cowboy friends, to go serve and fight in the Spanish-American War. They're called the Rough Riders. Nothing to do with DMX and early 2000s hip hop. At the Battle of San Juan Hill, he famously waved his hand and led the charge up San Juan Hill. He got a lot of help from the African American troops in the 9th and 10th Cavalries, who pinned down the defenses and let the Rough Riders roll up the hill and take the top and secure victory. And if you read the first-hand accounts, Theodore Roosevelt gives credit to the 9th and 10th Cavalries. They're kind of the offensive linemen, and Roosevelt is the quarterback who throws the touchdown or scores the touchdown and gets all the glory. He's hailed as a hero. Buffalo Bill Cody's Wild West show starts reenacting it almost immediately, and from this point, Roosevelt's career takes off like a rocket. 2 days later, the Spanish fleet tried to break out of Santiago Bay, and it's destroyed. The U.S. then took Puerto Rico, and on August 12th, just 4 months after the war started, Spain signed its armistice to end the fighting in the Spanish-American War. This is a picture of Theodore Roosevelt in the glasses in the middle and his Rough Riders. Here's a map that kind of shows you what's going on. The USS Maine exploding. We have the invasion force here in Santiago and also the Puerto Rico. And we're going to stop there and take a little break. Pick it up in the next section. I hope you enjoyed this.